So my 14-year-old's been listening to a lot of Pink Floyd lately. So I've had Dark Side of the Moon playing in the house oftentimes. And I feel like for this story about the ACC, there is a line from Money that makes a lot of sense. Money, it's a crime. Share it fairly, but don't take a slice of my pie. And that seems to be what's going on right now in the ACC as they're trying to, I guess at the presidential level, better distribute the money. What exactly is going on right now in the ACC as it relates to revenue sharing?
Well, there's a group of ADs, including North Carolina's Bubba Cunningham, who was looking at how they should distribute money. I mean, there's about to be a lot more money coming into the ACC, not as much as the SEC and the Big Ten, of course, but the television contract's going up because of the carriage deal with Comcast. The college football playoff is about to expand. The NCAA basketball tournament may expand. They've hired this revenue consultant, so there may be more money coming in. And now they're talking about how should we chop it up? Should the teams that have success in the NCAA basketball tournament get to keep more of that money? Should the teams that go to the college football playoff get to keep more of that money? Should it be based on the number of scholarships you give out, which would help teams like Boston College has 31 sports that they sponsor. So there's a lot of negotiations or conversations, probably is the best word, on how to distribute the money, all with an eye toward keeping some of those teams happy, I would think, that are looking at the SEC and the Big Ten.
Brian Murphy, WRAL, joining us here on the Heister Automotive Group Hotline. And Murph, this is a simple yet new concept for the ACC, because the ACC, one of its pillars when it was founded was it was the Three Musketeers. All for one, one for all. Everyone got an equal share. And now, though, there's 15 pieces to this pie now. And is that kind of where you're seeing some of this sentiment, particularly from Carolina, who's had the success that they've had in the tournament, NCAA tournament, and Clemson in football? Because you can't get rid of Boston College, you can't get rid of Wake Forest, you can't get rid of some of these schools maybe you don't want anymore, but can you change the way that the math equation works?
Yeah, what I thought was interesting, and I've gone through 20 years worth of tax documents that all the big conferences have filed. I mean, the Big Ten gives out, like when I say equal revenue distribution, they are all within a couple $100,000 of each other. The ACC, even though they give out equal distribution or relatively equal, Clemson has taken the biggest share for the last 6 years because they've sent a team to the college football playoff. I don't know exactly how that formula works, but apparently, and if you just look at the numbers, you can tell, there is some extra money that's given to teams that perform a little bit better. That may be to help offset expenses. It may be for a variety of reasons, but they do not distribute in the same exact share way that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 in particular do. So there's already some of that stuff built into their formula. This would go above and beyond that. And Bubba Cunningham told me that they're going to probably produce 4 models. One that's basically the same, one that has minimal, one that has moderate, and one that has aggressive, unequal revenue distribution. They'll kick those 4 ideas around at some point and then bring them to the full athletic director level, and then I assume it'll get to the presidential level at some point. But you could see why schools that are having great success, whether it's in basketball or football or on television all the time, would say, hey, we need to get a little bit more of all this money.
But that's not how the sports television industrial complex works. Like the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NHL, these things are collectively bargained. The television revenue goes into the pool, and they derive money through other means on the local level. So I'm having a hard time processing where suddenly this is going to solve some of the ACC's problems. I feel like this would create more problems. We actually saw this in the Big 12, where Texas had its own television network through ESPN, and Oklahoma also got an increased revenue share compared to the other Big 12 teams, and that still did not stop those two teams from bouncing for the SEC in 2025.
Right. I think the Big 12 is the best counterexample to this. The Big 12 allowed each school to sell tier rights. Obviously, Texas's third-tier rights and Oklahoma's third-tier rights are worth way more than West Virginia and Kansas State's, just to pick 2 schools. But you're right. In the end, the extra money didn't stop Texas and Oklahoma from going to the SEC. And in this case, unless you're going to give Clemson all of Wake Forest money or all of Boston College's money, It's not going to close the gap with what the SEC and the Big Ten are getting. So you may make them happier, but are you going to stop a school that wants to leave for more money from leaving for more money? Like, I guess the question I have, and I haven't really gotten an answer to this, is to what end? Like, why you're doing this to make a school happy that's likely to leave anyhow? Mm-hmm. Or are you going to get some kind of commitment from them that if we do unequal revenue distribution, we'll stay for another 20 years? I doubt a school would sign up for that. So I'm not really sure what the end goal of unequal revenue distribution is.
I would say, though, to counter the Big 12 as the example, as the opposite, Texas isn't leaving for money. They're leaving because they're mad about Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. That they have a piece of that SEC pie. They didn't want anyone else, certainly little brother, to have something that they didn't have.
Of course.
I mean, Texas is what? Either the richest or the second richest athletic department in the country.
It's one of.
It's like twice NC State's budget. Yeah. It's not even
right.
Like, it's crazy. But yet, look at the results in Texas and NC State. They're probably fairly similar over the last 8 years.
Well, look at Texas A&M's results with all that money.
Well, and there's the other thing. I mean, where does the money finally get you? So that,
right.
But that's Murphy, and we've had this conversation before. Brian Murphy, WRAL. If you're Clemson, how much money is enough, and what are you really going for? Do you need super duper money so you can have like the biggest support staff in the history of the world, like Alabama, or do you want to be in the playoff every single freaking year? Mm-hmm. I want to be in the playoff every single freaking year. That's just me.
I think this ties to a couple things that's happening in the NCAA. You saw today, if you haven't seen, the NCAA put out new guidance for NIL, and it allows, in some ways, closer cooperation with collectives. And Courtney Bangart told me this at the ACC tip-off, and I hadn't quite put it together this way, but she said, we were talking about football money and what it means and the trickle down to women's basketball, and she said, well, what it really means is I can use all the football money to build facilities and pay for salaries, and then I can turn my donors loose on NIL. And so that gap between what Texas A&M takes in and what NC State takes in, or North Carolina or Clemson, can then be just unleashed. You can unleash your donors on NIL. Mm-hmm. And so I think at some point Clemson's going to say, well, hey, it's great that we make it to the playoff every year, but if we're getting smashed every single year because, $30 million is going to buy a class every year. And I know it doesn't translate dollar to dollar, victory to victory like that. But I do think at some point some of those schools just, hey, look, we're just as good as South Carolina. Why are they being paid $50 million more per year than we are?
Brian Murphy, WRAL.com, WRALSportsFan.com. I know you got more of this on the website. Go check it out, Brian. We appreciate it. It's the OG alongside Joe Giglio. I'm Joe Ovies. I wanted to hammer one point, as you mentioned, with Texas and their budget and Texas A&M.
Number 3, Texas is 3 in the country. Ohio State, Alabama, Texas.
It's great that you got all this money. And Florida State and Miami are probably doing a little saber rattling here, too, because they're like, well, how can we compete? Well, you keep making terrible decisions, so why am I going to give you more money? Clemson can have all the money in the world, but if they're not hiring Dabo to build the culture that they got right now and the boosters aren't lockstep with what the organization's trying to do, well, then they're not where they're at. Florida State and Miami are in positions that they're in because of the consequences of their own action. Remember that chart? F around, find out? Well, that's what Miami and Florida State keep doing all the time, every time they get in their own way when it comes to their own success. We're going to throw money at the problem. And do what with it? You get Mario Cristobal. How's that working out for you right now in year one? Well, Texas A&M, we're gonna put it on the table, and we're gonna show off to Texas, and we're gonna give Jimbo this contract. Now you're stuck with it. What does it get you? So we're all obsessed with money. What's Wake Forest doing with Dave Clawson, by the way? What's the excuse?
Top 10.
What's the excuse? Why can they do it with their resources and you can't? Why? Until you can answer that question, I don't want to hear squat about how much money you're pulling in from television revenue and whether or not you should be getting more of the pie because, well, we're the bigger brand that ABC wants to put on in primetime. So freaking what? You haven't earned anything in this modern era. Nothing to deserve this kind of stuff right now and have this conversation. And there's a larger point here too, the reality that nobody wants to really confront. And look, props to the powers that be for trying, but we all know how this ends. Let's say Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Virginia Tech get higher payouts based on merit. It will still pale in comparison to what Rutgers is making in the Big Ten. It pales in comparison to what Vanderbilt is getting in the SEC. So you're going to leave for that money at some point the same way that Texas and Oklahoma did. And by the way, in the Pac-12, they used to have uneven revenue distribution as well. Look at what South Carolina, Southern Cal, and UCLA did. Left for the Big Ten where the money was just too good to pass up. So all of this is a little bit disingenuous and also, not to be the party pooper here, but kind of a moot point in about 5 to 6 years when somebody truly tests the grant of rights.